So let's now finalize these screens. And for this, I want to start on that start game screen again. I want to improve this screen a little bit, and I, for example, want to add my title above this input area. And for that, if we go to the start game screen, we have to actually add another view, because at the moment, everything on this screen is only this input area. This entire view here is this entire input area container. So I will add another view on this screen in the start game screen component here. And then in there, above this container that holds the text input and so on, I want to add my title component that I created before, which is imported from components UI title. And in that title component, we could say something like guess my number, because that is the title of the game, let's say. With that, we got this title here, but of course this is not looking good. Having this sit on the top edge is not looking good at all. To change this positioning, I will add another property here in my style sheet and name it screen container or root container. Maybe that is a fitting name. And here I want to set up flex 1 so that whatever receives this style takes up as much space as possible. And here I also want to add margin top 100 and actually reduce margin top in the input container now to, let's say, 36. And then we can add this root container style to this view here. So we add the style prop and point at styles root container. With that, this looks nicer, but I also don't want that title to stretch from left to right. Now, there certainly would be different ways of fixing this, but the way I will choose here is that on that root container, I simply change align items, which aligns items across the cross axis, which in this case is left to right, from stretch, which is the default, which leads to this title being stretched, to center. And with that, it's not stretched anymore, but instead centered like this. So that's an enhancement, I would say. What I also want to change is that I want to have a little instruction here inside of that input container box. A little instruction that tells me that I should enter a number that then has to be guessed. So for this, above this text input, we can add a text, a regular text, which we of course have to import from React Native like this. And in this text here, we can then say enter a number like this. Now, of course, this is totally not readable, so we need to add some styling here. And for the styling, I will add another style property here, the instruction text property maybe. And we can give the text a color of colors dot, let's try primary 500, though that might be too dark. And let's increase the font size to 24. With that, we can now add this to this text by adding the style prop and pointing at styles dot instruction text. And with this done, we now got this instruction. And I think it's not too easy to read. So as a workaround, we could add a lighter shade. But I think the better workaround is to make this yellow, since the number input field also has yellow text and so on. And therefore, I'll actually switch this from primary 500 to accent 500 to this yellow color, which we stored. And with this, yep, that doesn't look too bad. Now you could add more, you could add an image to this screen, enhance it in any way you want, but I think this looks okay, this is decent. I therefore now want to continue on this screen, where we actually play the game. And on this screen, of course, the buttons currently aren't that good looking. I'm also not entirely happy with that number container, so I will work on this as well, but I will start with the buttons. I want to group those buttons and the instruction text that belongs to them in a box as we have it here on that start game screen. And actually, I like the style of that box, so I would like to use exactly the same box. Now, since I plan on using exactly the same box as I have it here on the start game screen, it makes sense to create a dedicated component that renders this box. So in the components UI folder, I'll add a card.js file because this kind of component that provides such a container with this kind of look is typically called a card. So therefore here we have our card function and we export this as a default here. And then we grab the card related code from start game screen. And for this, I'm not going to grab all that code because, of course, the specific content that we have in this box on the start game screen should stay in that screen. That's not what we want to outsource into a generic component. It's just a background, just a container itself. And therefore, it's actually this view here, which I'll grab and return in here, also with a closing tag. And then in the card component, I expect to get my children prop, and I output this between the opening and closing view tags, and that means that I can now use my card component as a wrapper around any kind of content to wrap this view with this style around that content. Of course, for this to work, we also need to bring over the style though, and therefore I'll import the style sheet from React Native and create this styles constant here with style sheet create, like this here. And then in the start game screen here, we can grab this input container style property, which is responsible for styling this container, this card container, and cut that from start game screen and add it into this card.js file into the style sheet instead. And I'll rename it to card because this is now really the kind of style we are applying here. With that, we can now use this card component in the start game screen, and there we can import card from components UI card, like that. And now we just need to replace this view, which is wrapped around our text input elements, with card. And of course, also replace the closing element that belongs to that view. And we can now also use this on the game screen to wrap this around our buttons there. Here, I want to replace this view with card, also replace the closing view, and of course, make sure that card is being imported from the components UI card file. I also now want to use my instruction text that I defined here on start game screen, this text with that styling on the game screen for this higher or lower text. And therefore, for the same reason, we can create a component, the instruction text component, or however you want to name it. The name, of course, is totally up to you. But this also is a default React component, like this. And in here, we want to return this text here, which we have in the start game screen, where we say enter a number. And for this, we then, of course, want to import text from React Native and expect to get that children prop here as well, so that we get this actual content that should be rendered between the text tags from the place where this instruction text component will be used. And then again, we want to bring over the styles because that's the primary reason for creating this reusable component, so that we have the styles defined once in one place and we can then use it in different parts of the application. And we therefore create such a styles object here with style sheet create, like this. And then we go back to start game screen. We grab the instruction text styling here and cut that and bring that over here into the style sheet so that this works there. And of course, this should not be content, but children here. So now with that, we can use this instruction text component here in the start game screen component instead of the regular text component. We now use the instruction text also for the closing tag. And we get rid of this style assignment. We don't have that style in this file anymore, and we don't need it. And of course, you should add this instruction text import. And on the other hand, we can get rid of the text component import because we're not using the raw text component in this file anymore. And now in the game screen, we can also use this. We can replace this text component with the instruction text, like that, and make sure that we import this component. And we can also get rid of the text component import here. With all those changes made, let's see if this works. It looks like we have an error. Can't find variable colors. Okay, so in the card component, I'm referring to this colors constant, and I'm doing the same thing here in the instruction text. And in both component files, I'm missing the colors import. So of course, we should import this from constants colors and add this line of import to both the card.js as well as the instruction text.js files. With that, we're missing the variable view in card, and that makes sense. I'm rendering a view, so of course we have to import this. Now this should render successfully. It crashed on Android as it seems, so let me restart it there. And now we still have this box here, but we also have it on this game screen now. There, it's now just the positioning of the buttons, which I want to change, and then I got a couple of other things I'd like to change as well.